The acrid smell of burning paper was my first clue that my life had been dismantled while I slept. My mother sat at the kitchen island, her face illuminated by the soft morning sun, calmly stirring a spoonful of honey into her tea, while my university acceptance letter lay in charred, blackened flakes at the bottom of a porcelain bowl. "It's done, Maya," she whispered without looking up, her voice as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. "The tuition money is gone. Alara's wedding venue needed the final deposit, and as the elder sister, this is your gift to her. You're the strong one. You'll find another way, but Alara only gets one special day." In that single heartbeat, the $24,000 I had earned through 3 years of grueling double shifts and the dream of becoming a trauma nurse evaporated into the Aegean Sea for a destination wedding I wasn't even sure I'd be invited to. The Blackwell household was a place where appearances were the only currency that mattered. From the outside, we were the picture of suburban stability. Our house in the suburbs of Virginia was a 2-story colonial with shutters the color of midnight and a porch that always smelled like the lavender my mother meticulously tended. My father, Arthur, was a silent shadow of a man, a mid-level accountant who spent his life crunching numbers for others while his own wife dictated the math of our home. He was the kind of man who would apologize to a wall if he bumped into it, a man who found safety in his silence. Then there was my mother, Elena. She was the architect of our reality, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, which were always scanning for imperfections. To Elena, life was a stage, and we were her players. And the star of her show was always my younger sister, Alara. Alara was born with a delicate beauty and a perceived fragility that she wore like a royal cloak. While I was the sturdy one, the one with the scraped knees and the stack of library books, Alara was the flower. If she sneezed, the household went into a state of emergency. If she cried, the world had to stop until her tears were wiped away with silk. I grew up in the periphery of her spotlight, learning early on that my role was to be the scaffolding that held her up. I didn't mind it at first. I took pride in my independence. I took the hand-me-downs so she could have the brand-name dresses. I worked the late-night shifts at the hospice center, smelling of antiseptic and old age, just so I could save every penny for a life that was finally, truly mine. My dream was a sharp contrast to the soft, floral world my mother curated. I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted the adrenaline of the ER, the precision of medicine, the ability to save lives when everything was falling apart. For 3 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was the dutiful daughter who helped my mother with her charity luncheons and listened to Alara moan about her stressful life as an aspiring influencer. By night, I was a certified nursing assistant, working in the oncology ward, holding the hands of people who had no one else. I loved the weight of my stethoscope. It was the only thing in my life that felt real. The asset that eventually became the target was my savings account. It was a high-yield account I'd opened the day I turned 18. I worked 2 jobs throughout community college, one at the hospital and another at a 24-hour diner. I lived on black coffee and sheer willpower. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't go on vacations. Every time the balance ticked up, I felt a little more free. It was my get-out-of-jail card. By the time I received my acceptance letter to the prestigious nursing program at Johns Hopkins, I had enough for the first 2 years of tuition and housing. I was so close I could taste the freedom. But the cracks in the facade began to show 6 months ago when Alara met Marcus. Marcus was the son of a wealthy real estate developer, or so he claimed. He was all flash and no substance, driving a leased Porsche and talking about investments that never seemed to materialize. Alara was smitten, and my mother was ecstatic. A wedding into the upper crust was exactly what Elena wanted for her gallery of life. But then Marcus's father was hit with a federal investigation. Their accounts were frozen, and suddenly, the lavish influencer wedding of the year in Santorini was a dream that was about to turn into a public embarrassment. I remember a dinner 2 weeks ago. The air was thick with the scent of roast chicken and tension. Alara was picking at her food, her eyes red from crying. "The florist called," she sobbed. "If we don't pay the $15,000 deposit by Friday, she's giving our date away. And the villa. Oh God, Mom. Marcus says his dad is still waiting on the wire transfer. I'll be the laughingstock of the internet." My mother's eyes didn't go to my father, who was staring intently at his mashed potatoes. Her eyes slid to me. It was a cold, calculating look, the kind a predator gives a wounded animal. "Don't worry, Alara," my mother said, her voice dripping with a terrifying sweetness. "We're a family, and in this family, we take care of our own. Maya has been very industrious. Haven't you, dear?" I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. My bank account was private. My mail was my own. Or so I thought. I didn't realize that my mother had spent years accidentally opening my bank statements and memorizing my login details from the sticky note I'd hidden in my desk. A desk she cleaned every Wednesday. In the days following that dinner, the house was strangely quiet. There were no more outbursts from Alara. My mother was uncharacteristically kind to me, making my favorite tea and asking about my little nursing school. I thought, foolishly, that they had found another way. I thought my father had finally stood up to her, or that Marcus's family had come through. I went to bed that final night feeling a sense of peace, my bags half packed, my scrubs folded neatly in a trunk. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of the paper shredder in the home office. When I walked into the kitchen, the smell of smoke greeted me first. Then, the sight of my mother, the porcelain bowl, and the ashes of my future. "You did what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic thud that made my vision blur at the edges. "I transferred it last night, Maya," she said, finally looking at me. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a chilling sense of entitlement. "The school can wait. You're young, you're strong, you'll earn it back. But Alara's reputation is on the line now. You wouldn't want your sister to start her marriage in shame, would you?" I looked at my father, who had just walked into the room. He saw the ashes in the bowl. He saw my trembling hands. He looked at the floor, adjusted his glasses, and walked to the coffee pot. "Your mother knows best, Maya," he muttered to the wall. "It's just money. Family is forever." The room began to spin. I felt a surge of nausea so violent I had to grip the edge of the counter. The physical sensation of betrayal isn't a sharp pain. It's a cold, hollow emptiness that starts in your gut and spreads until your limbs feel like lead. I realized then that I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an insurance policy. I was a piggy bank they had decided to smash because the star of the family wanted a prettier stage. It was $24,000, I choked out. That was 3 years of my life. That was my soul. Don't be dramatic, Alara chirped, gliding into the kitchen in her silk robe, her face glowing with a triumphant smirk she didn't even bother to hide. You love working. You're good at it. Besides, Santorini is going to be amazing. I'll make sure to tag you in the photos. She reached for a croissant, her diamond engagement ring, probably bought with a credit card they expected me to pay off next, sparkling in the morning light. I looked at the three of them, my mother, the thief, my sister, the parasite, and my father, the coward. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a fuse burning down. They thought they had broken me. They thought I would cry, scream, and then eventually, like always, go back to work to provide for them. They didn't realize that when you take everything from someone who has worked for every scrap they own, you don't leave them with nothing. You leave them with nothing to lose. Looking back, the signs weren't just there, they were screaming at me. But I had been too blinded by my own hopes to see them for what they were. For weeks, the atmosphere in our house had shifted from its usual high-strung vanity to something more calculated, more predatory. It began with the accidental audits. My mother, Elena, started taking a sudden, intense interest in my financial literacy. She'd sit me down with a cup of herbal tea, her voice a soft purr as she asked about my savings goals. Maya, darling, I'm just so worried about your future. With the economy the way it is, are you sure your little nest egg is in the right kind of account? Is it truly secure? At the time, I thought she was finally acknowledging my hard work. I didn't realize she was scouting the perimeter of my defenses. Then there were the cleaning sprints. My mother had always been a neat freak, but lately she had become obsessed with my bedroom. I'd come home from an exhausting 16-hour shift at the hospital to find my desk reorganized and my drawers ruffled. When I confronted her about it, she'd just wave a hand dismissively. I was looking for the spare linens, Maya. Don't be so sensitive. It's not like you have secrets from your own mother. It was during one of these cleanings that she must have found the small, leather-bound notebook where I kept my passwords. I had hidden it inside a hollowed-out chemistry textbook, but to a woman like Elena, who treated every room in the house as her personal kingdom, there were no hiding places. The most chilling warning, however, came from my father. A week before the morning of the burnt letter, he caught me in the hallway late at night. He looked older, the shadows under his eyes deep enough to hold a lifetime of regrets. He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, then pulled back, his hand trembling. Maya, he whispered, his eyes darting toward the master bedroom. If you have anything truly important, maybe you should keep it somewhere else. Somewhere outside this house. I had laughed it off, thinking he was just being his usual paranoid self, worried about a break-in. Dad, the bank is the safest place for my money, I told him. He just shook his head, a look of profound sorrow on his face, and walked away without another word. I didn't realize he was trying to warn me about the thief sleeping in his own bed. The day before the world ended, the house was unnervingly festive. Ilara was prancing around with fabric swatches for her bridesmaid dresses, humming a tune that sounded like a funeral dirge to my ears. She kept glancing at me with a strange, pitying smile.
You know, Maya, she said, filing her nails with a rhythmic scritch scritch sound that set my teeth on edge. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the things that really matter.
You'll understand one day when you have a life as beautiful as mine. I had ignored her, focused on my laptop, double checking the enrollment deadlines for Johns Hopkins. I felt so secure, so untouchable. I was 24 hours away from the first day of the rest of my life. The point of no return arrived at 3:14 a.m. I woke up to a thirst that wouldn't quit, my throat dry from the stale air of the house. As I padded down the hallway in my socks, I noticed a sliver of light coming from the home office. I heard the low, rhythmic clicking of a mouse and the hushed, urgent tones of my mother's voice. "Is it through yet?" she hissed. "Almost," came a male voice. Marcus, Alara's fiancé. "The second transfer is pending. It'll clear by 6 a.m. That covers the villa and the private catering. Your daughter is going to have the wedding of the decade, Elena." "She deserves it," my mother replied, her voice thick with a twisted pride. "Maya has her whole life to work. She's like a mule. She doesn't mind the heavy lifting. But Alara was meant for better things." The hallway seemed to tilt. I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it through the door. My skin went clammy, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead as the reality began to sink in. They weren't just talking about a loan. They were talking about my money. I waited until I heard Marcus leave through the back door and my mother retreat to her bedroom. With shaking hands, I crept into the office. The air smelled of expensive cigars and the floral perfume my mother favored. The computer screen was still awake, its blue light casting ghostly shadows on the walls. My breath hitched as I saw the open browser tab. It was my bank's portal. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keys, paralyzed by a dread so thick it felt like drowning. I refreshed the page. The balance read 14 cents. My vision blurred. I felt a violent surge of nausea, the room spinning in a dizzying kaleidoscope of gray and white. I clicked on the transaction history, my eyes burning. 2 wire transfers, one for $12,000 and another for $12,000, both labeled gift in the memo line. The recipient was a holding account for a luxury travel agency in Greece. Then I saw it, the final blow. There was a third pending transaction, a loan application in my name for an additional $10,000, using my car, the one I'd paid for in cash, as collateral. They weren't just taking my past, they were mortgaging my future. A physical weight settled on my chest, making every breath a jagged struggle. It was as if the very floor had turned into quicksand, pulling me down into a dark, cold place where words didn't exist. My hands were shaking so violently I had to sit on them to keep them still. In that moment, the woman who had raised me became a stranger. The sister I had protected became an enemy. I looked at the printer. Resting in the tray was a confirmation of the loan approval, my electronic signature forged with chilling precision. I picked up the paper, the crispness of it feeling like a razor against my skin. This was the evidence. This was the document that proved I was nothing more than an asset to be liquidated for Alara's vanity. The shock was so profound it transcended tears. I felt an eerie, crystalline clarity wash over me. The girl who would have forgiven them, who would have accepted their excuses, died in that office at 3:30 a.m. As I looked at the gift memo on the screen, a new sensation took root in the hollow space where my heart used to be. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of a child. It was a cold, calculated fury, the kind of rage that builds empires or burns them to the ground. I didn't go back to sleep. I stood in the dark, watching the clock tick towards 6 a.m., waiting for the moment my mother would burn my acceptance letter. I knew she would do it. It was the final step in her plan to keep me trapped, to ensure I would have no choice but to stay and keep working to pay off the debt they had saddled me with. When the sun finally began to bleed through the curtains, I went to the kitchen. I watched her stir her tea. I watched the ashes of my dreams fall into the bowl. And as she told me that my life's work was gone for Alara's sake, I realized they had made a fatal mistake. They thought they had taken my power. They didn't realize they had just given me permission to be as ruthless as they were. "I hope the wedding is worth it, Mom," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Because it's the last thing you're ever going to get from me." The kitchen felt like a vacuum, the air sucked out by my mother's casual admission of theft. I stood there, my feet rooted to the cold linoleum, watching Alara butter a piece of toast as if she hadn't just helped orchestrate the destruction of my future. The physical reaction was violent. A sharp, stinging heat climbed up my neck, and my hands shook so hard I had to shove them into my pockets. "The loan, Mom," I said, my voice cracking before I forced it into a low, steady blade. I saw the browser history. I saw the loan application in my name, the one you used my car to secure. You didn't just take my savings, you stole my identity. My mother's hand paused on her teacup. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, as if I were a child complaining about a broken toy. "It was a necessary precaution, Maya. The destination wedding costs exceeded the initial budget, and Marcus's family is having some temporary liquidity issues. We couldn't let the deposit slide. It's a family investment." "A family investment?" I let out a dry, jagged laugh that felt like glass in my throat. "I am the only one investing. You and Dad have your retirement accounts, Alara has her influencer wardrobe, and I have a debt for a wedding I'm not even sure I want to attend. Did you even think about how I'm going to get to work if the bank repossesses my car?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Alara snapped, her voice high and nasal. She stood up, smoothing her silk robe. "You can take the bus. Or better yet, Marcus can get you a job at one of his father's firms as a receptionist. You're so obsessed with those gross hospitals anyway. This is doing you a favor. It's time you joined the real world where appearances actually matter." I turned to my father, who was meticulously cleaning his glasses, his eyes fixed on the lenses as if the rest of the room didn't exist. "Dad, are you really going to sit there? This is fraud. This is a crime. She signed my name." My father finally looked up, but there was no fire in his eyes, only a weary, pathetic resignation.
"Maya, your mother, she just wants what's best for the family's image. Once Alara marries Marcus, we'll all be taken care of. It's just a temporary setback. We'll figure out a way to pay you back, I promise."
"With what money, Arthur?" my mother cut in, her voice sharpening. "Maya is young. She has decades to work. This is her contribution to her sister's happiness. If she wants to be a nurse so badly, she can work another 3 years. It'll build character. The first twist hit me then, a realization that made the room tilt. I walked over to the kitchen counter where Marcus had left his leather portfolio the night before. I snatched it up before anyone could stop me. "Give that back!" Alara shrieked, lunging for me, but I stepped aside, my adrenaline finally kicking in. I flipped it open, scanning the documents inside. I wasn't looking for wedding plans. I was looking for the truth about Marcus. There it was, a stack of notice to quit letters for a luxury apartment and a series of legal notices regarding unpaid gambling debts. Marcus didn't have a wealthy developer father. He was a fraud, a high-stakes gambler who was using my sister and my money to stay afloat.
Mom, the liquidity issues aren't temporary, I said, tossing the papers onto the island. Marcus is broke. You didn't just steal my money for a wedding. You stole it to pay off his bookies so he wouldn't be in jail on the wedding day. The color drained from my mother's face, but only for a second. Then she did something worse than lying. She smiled. "I know, Maya. I've known for a month." I froze. "You knew?" "Appearances, Maya," she whispered, leaning in, her breath smelling of honey and malice. "If the wedding is canceled now, the shame would kill me. We get them married, we link our names to his family's supposed prestige, and then we deal with the fallout. Your money bought us time. That's all that matters." The second twist came from Alara. She didn't look shocked by the news of Marcus's debts. She looked at me with a smirk that was pure poison. "Who do you think practiced your signature for the loan, big sister? Mom's handwriting is too old-fashioned. I've been practicing your scrawl since we were kids. It's identical. Even a handwriting expert couldn't tell the difference." I felt a wave of coldness, so intense, it felt like I was being submerged in ice. My own sister had forged the documents that would ruin my credit and take my car. They had sat around this very table, laughing and drinking wine, while they planned how to skin me alive for the sake of a fake wedding to a fake millionaire. But the final blow, the one that broke the last tether I had to this family, was sitting in the trash can. I saw a corner of a bright blue envelope peeking out from under some coffee grounds. I reached in and pulled it out, ignoring the grime. It was a letter from Johns Hopkins. Not just a welcome packet, but a notification of a full-ride merit scholarship I had been awarded 3 weeks ago. A scholarship that required a signed acceptance by the end of last week. "You hid this," I whispered, staring at the coffee-stained paper. "I wouldn't have even needed the $24,000 for tuition. I could have used it for living expenses. I could have been gone weeks ago." "If you knew you had a full ride, you wouldn't have kept working those double shifts," my mother said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We needed that cash flow for the catering deposits. If I'd given you that letter, you'd have become unavailable to us. I couldn't risk you leaving before the wedding was fully funded." I looked at the three of them. My mother, the cold-blooded strategist. My sister, the gleeful thief. My father, the silent accomplice. The shock that had been paralyzing me for the last hour suddenly evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a physical weight had been lifted. "You've spent my whole life telling me I'm the strong one," I said, my voice now as cold and hard as a tombstone. "You told me I could handle the heavy lifting. You told me I was the scaffolding." I walked over to the sink, picked up the porcelain bowl containing the ashes of my acceptance letter, and slowly poured them over the breakfast my mother had so carefully prepared. "You were right," I continued, looking my mother dead in the eye. "I am the strong one. And the problem with being the scaffolding is that when I walk away, the whole damn house falls down. "Where are you going?" Alara demanded, her voice rising in a panicked pitch. "We have the dress fitting at 10. "I'm going to the police," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. My father dropped his glasses. My mother's tea splashed onto her silk blouse. "You wouldn't," my mother hissed, her eyes widening. "You'd send your own sister to jail? You'd ruin our family name?" "You ruined it the second you touched my life," I said, turning toward the door. "And Mom? Marcus's bookies? I think I'll give them a call too. I'm sure they'd love to know where the rest of the wedding fund is being kept." I walked out of the kitchen, the sound of my mother's suddenly hysterical screams and Alara's sobbing following me like a dying wind. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't take a memento. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the blue envelope. As I stepped out onto the porch, the morning air felt cleaner than it had in years. They thought they had trapped me in a cage of debt and duty. They didn't realize they had just handed me the keys to my own liberation. By the time the sun reached its peak, I would be a ghost to them, but a ghost with a very long memory. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were the color of bone. The engine idled, a low hum that anchored me to the reality of the street while the house behind me felt like a structure built of matchsticks and lies. The transformation wasn't a sudden burst of heat. It was a slow, agonizing freeze. Every memory of family dinner and every holiday I had worked to fund felt like a layer of skin being peeled away, leaving something raw and tempered underneath. I wasn't the scaffolding anymore. I was the demolition crew. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years, my Aunt Sarah. She was my father's sister, the shame of the family because she had walked away from my mother's suffocating influence decades ago to become a defense attorney in the city. "Maya?" Her voice came through, sharp and surprised. "They took it all, Sarah," I said, my voice sounding like a stranger's, steady, low, and devoid of the tremors I felt in my chest. The savings, the car, the identity. They forged my signature for Marcus's debts. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by the sound of a pen clicking. "I've been waiting for this phone call since you turned 18, honey. Here's what we are going to do. Do not go back inside. Drive to the precinct on 4th Street. I'm calling a friend there now. And Maya, don't you dare feel guilty. They didn't just steal money. They tried to steal your life." The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. I sat in a cramped office with Detective Miller, a man with tired eyes who had seen 1,000 versions of my story. I handed over the blue envelope from Johns Hopkins, the printed screenshots of the bank transfers, and the loan documents I had snatched from the kitchen. "Your sister and mother could be looking at felony identity theft and bank fraud," Miller said, leaning back in his chair. "Since the amount exceeds $20,000, it's not just a family spat. It's a federal matter if we involve the interstate transfers to Greece. Are you sure you want to press charges?" I thought of the ashes in the porcelain bowl. I thought of Alara's smirk and my father's silence. "I'm not pressing charges," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm just reporting a crime. What happens to the criminals is up to the law." The retribution began 3 days later, and it was a masterpiece of legal, surgical precision. Aunt Sarah helped me file for an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts where my money had been transferred. Since the funds were flagged as proceeds of a crime, the travel agency in Greece was forced to hold the transaction. The destination wedding didn't just lose its deposit. It was legally decapitated. I was staying in a small motel near the hospital when the calls started. My phone buzzed incessantly. 42 missed calls from my mother, 15 from Alara, and 2 from my father. I didn't answer. I waited until the following Tuesday, the day of the final dress fitting that Alara had been so excited about. I walked into the bridal boutique, the air thick with the scent of lilies and expensive silk. My mother was there, her face a mask of frantic desperation, arguing with the manager because her credit card had been declined.
Alara was in a corner, draped in a $20,000 lace gown, looking like a ghost of the girl I used to protect. "Maya!" my mother shrieked when she saw me. She ran over, her eyes wild. "You have to fix this. The bank has frozen everything. They're saying there's an investigation. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave us permission." "I didn't," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet shop. 2 other brides turned to stare. "I told the truth. I told the police that my sister forged my signature and you orchestrated the theft of my tuition. The scaffolding has been removed, Mom. I hope you like the view from the bottom." "You're destroying your sister's life," she hissed, her face contorting into something hideous. "Marcus's family will walk away. The wedding will be a scandal." "There is no Marcus's family, Mom," I said, tossing a folder onto the velvet settee. "Those are the reports from a private investigator Sarah hired. Marcus has 3 aliases and 4 outstanding warrants for check kiting. He wasn't marrying Alara for her beauty. He was marrying into this family because he thought you had money. He's already gone. He cleared out his apartment last night when the bank freeze hit." Alara let out a strangled cry, her hands clutching the lace of her dress as she collapsed onto the floor, a heap of white silk and shattered vanity. My mother looked at the folder, then at me, her mouth working but no words coming out. "The police are waiting outside," I said calmly. "They agreed to wait until I was finished. You have 10 minutes to say goodbye to the boutique before you go to the station for questioning." The fallout was total. Without my income and with their credit ruined by the fraud investigation, my parents had to sell the colonial house within 2 months. My father took a job as a night clerk at a warehouse, finally forced to face the reality his silence had created. Alara avoided jail time through a plea deal Aunt Sarah negotiated, mostly for my father's sake, but she was ordered to pay back every cent she stole through garnished wages for the next decade. She now works as a receptionist in a dental office, her influencer dreams replaced by the mundane reality of filing insurance claims. As for me, the transition was the hardest part. Johns Hopkins worked with me after Aunt Sarah and Detective Miller provided the police reports. They gave me a 1-semester deferment, and the bank eventually returned the $24,000 once the fraud was proven. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my small apartment in Baltimore. The air was crisp, smelling of rain and the harbor. My scrubs were laid out on the bed, my stethoscope draped over the chair, not a prop in someone else's play, but the tools of my trade. I was 3 weeks into my clinical rotations, and my hands, once shaking with the shock of betrayal, were now steady enough to draw blood and hold the hands of the dying. I received a letter from my father yesterday. He asked if I would come home for Thanksgiving. He said the house felt very quiet. I didn't write back. Some silences are earned, and some bridges are built to be burned so you can use the light to find your way home. I looked out over the city lights, a nurse in training with a life that belonged entirely to me. I realized then that they hadn't actually taken anything that mattered. They had taken my money, but they had inadvertently given me my freedom. I reached for my coffee, the warmth of the mug seeping into my palms, and smiled at the darkening sky. In the end, the most powerful thing you can do to a family that uses you as a foundation is to simply walk away and watch how fast they realize they never learned how to stand on their own.